Hi, Greg. How you doing?
How's it going, Hugh? Time for another full moon video.
Yeah, we're gonna have a full moon video. So, what is this? March, middle of March.
hmm
Friday's the full moon.
322 is coming up. Something interesting will happen on
Oh,
322. The
all the
rocket
dogs,
that's
all
going
the
to the moon
dogs.
is 300. Listen to this, Hugh. It's going to be 322, and they're sending a rocket to the moon. I don't know when they're going to launch it, but it's
Is that Pi
322
Day?
feet tall. No, it's not pi. It's 322.
What is 322?
Yeah, that's that number they always use for skull and bones and all that. So they
Oh,
made the
okay.
rocket 322 feet tall.
Yeah, my family made that college,
Right.
the
Yeah, the
Skull and
skull and bones
Bones College.
fraternity. hmm
Yeah. So, what have you been up to, Greg?
Well, working hard here. Not exactly, but we are
Number,
working on the book, and the book is coming
I
along.
know
We've
you
got
sent
what
me like
20,
20 chapters.
more than that, like 23, and we've got a couple more in the
Oh, there's
pipeline.
23 chapters?
hmm Something like that. And then we got we're going to talk a little bit about Eastman today. Eastman's in the book. We got to talk about Eastman.
He took my baby pictures.
So we got Eastman Kodak took your baby pictures, and it says right there on the
And you
back,
had
it's
Dirty
stamped.
Harry and Clint Eastwood. I joked to that.
Yeah. Well, it's trademarked. That was interesting. I was looking at your baby pictures, and the fact that it's the stamp is trademarked means those pictures are somewhere in a trademark office. And
Right, my baby
so,
pictures are in the U.S. patent, or not the patent. It used to be the Copyright Office did the patents. Now they have
yeah,
a patent office and a copyright office, I believe. I could be wrong.
right.
It's two different departments nowadays. Back then, when I was born, it wasn't. You got a patent through the Copyright Office
Yeah, yeah.
and a
That sounds right.
trademark through the Copyright Office. Nowadays, it's two separate. It's separate departments. I believe. I could be wrong. When I got my trademark, I had a whole different set of people to work with away from the Copyright Office. Then the government stole my trademark right out of the Library of Congress and put it in Webster's dictionary.
Well, let's talk about those trademark baby pictures for a second. The fascinating thing about it is it says right there on it, George Towers took the pictures. And
Yeah,
George Bush took down the Twin Towers, and they were taken on 9/11 or very, very close to
it
it
was
because the date
9/11.
stamped on it.
They were taken on 9/11 and developed on
Yeah,
9/23.
9/21. Yeah.
Yeah, 10 days later.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and they were taken by Eastman Kodak, and when they got their trademark.
Yeah.
So the pictures went to the Copyright Office because they had the original trademarks on them. And all of the pictures were taken by George Towers, and they all had a 2 and a 4 on them. And I was kidnapped at 4 on the very day Admiral Byrd was killed.
And oddly enough, somebody put with a marker, they wrote the number 44 on there. And then you see 44 on all
That
the
would have
movies.
been
That movie,
George.
the
That would have been
4400.
George Towers who did that.
Yeah. So that's why you see that 44 in movies just all the time.
Yeah, they marked me. My family owned the biggest video distribution company in New York. It was called Schwartz Video back then. And they distributed Hollywood movies all over the globe. Schwartz Video in downtown New York.
And Schwartz says you said that goes way back to the silent films, doesn't it?
All the way back, yeah, to Charlie Chaplin and W.C.
Yeah.
Fields and people like that. When
Right.
Hollywood
Yeah.
first got its start in this country, when movies first started, Kodak was part of that. And when my baby pictures went to the Copyright Office with a Kodak new trademark on it, my Aunt Gardner gave me a brand new Polaroid camera, which was the first camera on earth that could take instant pictures.
Fascinating, yeah.
That came out when my baby pictures were developed, and nobody else around me had one of those cameras because they cost several $1,000s back then. And
Not a problem for her though. She was quite wealthy.
well, my family had a lot of money, and because of the Harris Steam Thrashers and Massey Ferguson, and then Ava Gardner and Mickey Rooney and Frank Sinatra.
And not only them, but the Fullers also.
Yeah, Fuller's my Aunt Fuller. She was Edgar Allan Poe's literary critic in London in the London papers.
Very fascinating when I'm learning about Miss Sarah Margaret Fuller.
What'd you learn about her?
Well, we found out, how they like to hide everything in your life behind UFOs, like they do with the Kennedy murder. The driver for Kennedy's limo was Greer, and
Rare,
now they
yeah.
have the Greer, the
The
UFO
Pope was
guy.
at my college just before he got shot, and the world got Nick Pope.
Right.
I worked at Alex's Brass Bell for Premier, the real Premier owners. They were murdered across the street from my college, hit over the head with hammers. And then the world got Premier Networks coast to coast. The people that murdered the original owners of the Premier trademark gave the world coast to coast. And Art Bell, as I played at Alex's Brass Bell in downtown Utica, and all of that happened when I was 16 years old.
And to take it all the way back to Miss Fuller there, Miss Howe erected a statue for her.
Yeah, I went to school with Linda Mooten's family. John Mooten went to kindergarten class with me. And then go ahead, I interrupted you.
And then you have Molten Howe on Coast to Coast giving more UFOs.
She married Mr. Howe.
Yeah.
Linda Mooten Howe gives you UFOs. Everybody on Coast to Coast, they all know me.
And Hugh, she put that island, or she put that statue to Fuller, Poe's literary critic, on an island, and I just thought about that. Howe did that, and that's also Gilligan's Island, Mr. Howe on Gilligan's Island.
Yeah, and that's Bell and Howell too.
I don't know who that is.
Howell, but Bell and Howell. It was the first movie cameras.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Howell, and I'm the L. I'm the bottom line. None of this is coincidence. I'm more marked than any person in history.
There's a lot of fascinating stuff. Now back to Eastman that we were talking about. There's a senator, and she trying to be senator, taking Burr's place. So I figure
What's her
Burr's
name?
probably.
What is her name? Senator Eastman?
Marjorie K. Eastman. And I have to guess that K stands for Kodak,
she's
but I
trying
can't
to take
verify
Senator Burr's place.
Right, in North Carolina of all places. And
yeah, and that's where the police came that murdered my wife Victoria Milan in Johnson City, Tennessee. Two retired state policemen were my wife's security, who turned a blind eye as her ears were cut off and her throat slit Halloween Eve.
And she used to help run Martin Marietta. I'm
the Martin family, Greg. Like Mary Martin, that's my cousin, Peter Pan. And I remember Robin Williams, that's another one of my cousins from Birmingham, Michigan. He played Peter Pan too.
And
in my lifetime, two of my cousins played Peter Pan in Hollywood movies. And they both lived across the street from me.
That's interesting.
Interesting, isn't it? And I remember somebody tried to kill me at Beaumont Hospital in Troy, Michigan, with a shot of radiation. And on that day, I had been there to see my eye doctor, and she was going to give me LASIK surgery.
Yeah.
Back when I was about 30 years old, 35, I think. And I was single. I had just divorced my second wife. I was living on in a home I rented from Victoria's father, Bill Milan, and you had Kill Bill. I went to this hospital, saw my eye doctor. She was going to give me LASIK surgery so I wouldn't have to wear glasses. She went home and she was murdered in a garage next door to my cousin, Robin Williams. And then that as she was going home, I was given a shot of radiation that wasn't mine by a nurse in Beaumont Hospital, and it made my teeth and my hair fall out, and it burnt me internally for over a week. And they tried to kill me with a shot of radiation. And that's just par for me. I was playing in the lounges. I was playing at Sylvester Stallone's restaurant. Sylvester Stallone and Antonio Banderas, they made a movie back then. I was playing at Cafe Dina Marie's, and they were the owners of that lounge, I believe. Back to you.
Well, I was thinking about
The
more
Burr.
about
The Burr. I got off the subject of
about Eastman.
Burr
Yeah. We're going to talk some more about Eastman and how Eastman
because
tried to steal the
Kiki,
election.
my fiance Kiki, her best girlfriend was Sherry Tallman.
Okay.
Go on with your story, and then I'll tell you more about Kiki's murder and her daughter's murder.
Well, when we were talking about Eastman, there, that's who tried to help Trump steal the election too. Not the senator, but another his attorney helped try to. I think he's under indictment right now with Congress.
Oh, Eastman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, Eastman is the one that devised the plan for Trump to steal the election by claiming it was rigged.
And Eastman was the company.
That was Eastman's doing, I believe. I could be wrong, but that's what I think I read in the papers.
I think so. And Eastman Kodak had a big facility right there in Greenville, Tennessee,
where my wives were murdered. Right. Yeah. They were right next door to where my wives were murdered. That's correct.
Yeah. So they set all this up and had a big role to play.
From my baby pictures in 1950 into the trademark office, and they had the Twin Towers on the back of them before the Twin Towers were built.
Right.
Then they gave me a farm in Tennessee next to Eastman Kodak, and two of my wives are murdered. And one of them created the Head Start program for President Ronald Reagan. None of this is coincidence, Greg.
Right.
It's the Eastman Film Company using me from birth because I'm related to people like Ava Gardner and Frank Sinatra and Richard Harris. I'm the Harris and Gardner and Fuller. These are my family members.
This is why Trump tried to make Eastman what Pfizer became instead. He tried to give them the contract to make
Pfizer's
the vaccinations.
When I was kidnapped on the day that I and my twin were kidnapped on the day Admiral Byrd, my family member, was murdered. My mother told me he was murdered, and she was a nurse and she knew what she was talking about. In history books, they say he died of a heart attack. My mother always told me that was a lie. He was murdered. I and my twin were kidnapped. My father's hands were cut off by Pratt and Behringer at Twin Pines, where they made the Twin Pines milk trucks. They beat my twin to death that day, chained in a governor's basement. And Pfizer gave the world Preparation H after 5 men raped me after beating my twin to death. Preparation H. And I lived on Hoover Street, and the world got Hoover vacuums at the same time. And this was the day they murdered Admiral Byrd, my family member. So I was attacked by our country's enemies at 4, and they murdered my twin. And Pfizer's the company that gave the world Preparation H, as I had grown men, sodomizing me at the age of 4. And my twin,
right.
They were
sodomizing. Why they called it H.
We were chained to a toilet in a basement, and they were sodomizing us at 4. L. Brooks Patterson covered all of this up, and you find all kinds of things about Patterson and Graham too, don't you?
Yeah, unimaginable.
Graham owns the media in Detroit where I was kidnapped, and he gave Barr and Osborne, the people who raped me, jobs. at the TV and radio stations, and they claimed they were me all of my life.
Patterson was one of the cops giving the hookers to Bill Clinton when he was in Arkansas.
Yeah, another Patterson, that's right. And
Yeah.
Patterson's own nephew was with me. And he was hung in Patterson's jail cell after I told him that governors had murdered my twin and raped me. He ended up hung in his father or his uncle's own jail cell there in Oakland County. And that was back in like 62 or 3, something like that. His name was Theodore Oglesby, and his mother was Mrs. Brooks. And I'm the Brooks family. And that's where L. Brooks Patterson's name comes from. So I told my friend Theodore Oglesby I was raped. He's the only person I ever said. And then he was murdered that night in his uncle's jail cell in Oakland County, probably trying to ask his uncle why it was never made into a police report, because no policeman ever made a report about my twin's murder or my being kidnapped. Not in any police station.
Hmm.
And then we get to Eastman and Burr. He's trying to take Burr's place, and Burr was Raymond Burr. He played Perry Mason. My second wife I divorced, her family is the Perrys, and the Perrys covered up Victoria Mellon, my third wife's murder.
I assume that name goes back to Aaron Burr.
And Aaron Burr, Kiki, who was murdered before Victoria and murdered before Terry Heath, as in Sarah Heath Palin, as the election started with Clinton and Obama against, who do you call it? John McCain and Sarah Heath Palin. Well, my wife to be at that time, I bought her a Civil War ranch, was Terry Heath. And she was murdered by 2 off-duty policemen from Wisconsin. They hung her in her dog's leash. After I bought the civil rights farm, they had kidnapped her out of her CPS office, where she was protecting little kids from the porno industry on the Great Lakes. She lived in Wisconsin, and the lake between Wisconsin and Michigan, where I was flown out to the West Coast as a little kid as a sex slave.
Mm-hmm.
She was protecting a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old from the porno industry operating on the Great Lakes in those seaplanes. She had caught a porno industry doing that to those 2 little kids in Wisconsin. And as soon as she made it brought it to the attention of the police in Wisconsin, in Menominee, Wisconsin, she was kidnapped by 2 off-duty police in her office. They trashed her office and drove her across 3 state lines into Idaho or Iowa or someplace from Wisconsin. She escaped them and called me and asked me for help. She says, "Hugh, you're the only guy on earth I trust. I need help. I've been kidnapped." So I bought her this civil ranch farm, flew to Wisconsin, met her there, moved her house to Tennessee, and 6 months later, she was hung on her dog's leash. And they wrote that up as a suicide, and it wasn't a suicide.
No way. Right.
And that's just like they did to Victoria. Her ears were missing when they slit her throat Halloween Eve, and they wrote up a dismembered body as natural causes. And they did the same thing with Nancy Lavoie. Her leg was taken off, and then she was killed as they let the Bundys out of jail. And Kiki was murdered Christmas Day. And all these women were dismembered, murdered. And they wrote natural causes on all the death certificates, and CBS murdered my attorneys. When I hire attorneys, CBS journalist Tom Garrett destroyed my income. My attorney was murdered on his way to the district attorney's office. And that's because of the JFK archives and CBS Barbara Walters. And her partner, I don't know what his name was, Walter Cronkite,
Yeah, Walter Cronkite. Yeah.
Yeah, well, they covered the JFK murder on CBS, and it's all lies. All of that's lies. Just out here, they just arrested the Klein family for raping women in a prison. He raped like 13, 14, 15 women inside a prison cell. Where I was born and went to school with the Klein family, they framed Oswald. And everybody in the JFK archives is a family that lived around me when I was kidnapped in Oakland County. And all of these people have framed Oswald, and I'm the Baker family. Baker was Gardner, my aunt's mother. My Aunt Gardner was Bill Gates' mother of Microsoft, and on and on and on. And I'm related to all these people. They're my cousins. My father-in-law, Joe Jacobs of IBM, gave my cousin Bill Gates the software to make his first computer at my marriage to Joe Jacobs' daughter, Nancy Lavoie, and they murdered her when they let the Bundys out of prison in, I don't know, 2017, 2018.
Yeah.
And I know it was murder, but once again, it'll be written up as natural causes. And if I hire lawyers and give them the, the documentation that proves these were murders, the hospital records and the phone call records, they murder the attorneys, and the police from Carolina, the state police from Carolina, they just turn a blind eye, and they were protecting these women as they were murdered.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Carolina is Senator Graham's state, and Senator Graham owns the media in Detroit, the radio and TV that covered up my kidnap all the way back in the 50s.
Right. I think that's why Marjorie Eastman's running in North Carolina.
Against Burr. And Kiki, my fiance, who was murdered Christmas Day in '91, after being raped by my own brother, Michael, in front of our kids, as I worked at Premier Networks. And that's a whole nother story we can talk about after I tell you about Burr. But her best girlfriend was Sherry Tallman. And Sherry's dad was the detective on Perry Mason. And Perry Mason was played by Raymond Burr. And this is why Eastman is going after Burr's job, because they're hiding me. And I'm the guy that's in all of this. You know what Biden, he's using my family names Gonzalez, Harris, Jackson, and replacing me with my family's name with African. Kamala Harris is an African, but she pretends she's a Black woman, using Kamala Harris. That's my family's name. And this is after Biden as Obama's vice president, and with Clinton, after they murdered my wives on the Manning Ranch, and Manning co-created the JFK archives. And all of this is related in my life. So Kiki, who was murdered, and her sister was the Maybelline cover girl. And when her sister Sandy, when Karen was murdered, her sister Sandy was no longer the cover girl. Mae Musk took her place, had her son Elon Musk, and I'm the L, I'm bottom line. They stole my trademark. And the $2 trillion in theft is the reason they blew up the Twin Towers. They had to hide the theft of a federal publishing license, and the license came from Foley Federal Court. Then the CIA and the president told you that Muslims beheaded Mr. Foley. Well, I'm Mr. Foley. That's where my federal publishing license in New York came from. I own Bottomline New York, and DuPont and McMahon and Hulk Hogan and Ventura all worked at Bottomline Events, which was my stolen trademark. They had to hide that theft, and that's what they hid in the Twin Towers, along with my civil rights case against the Groves family and the Pentagon. They blew up the Twin Towers, they blew up the FBI documents in Building 7, and they blew up my civil rights case against the people who built the Pentagon at the Pentagon. In that office they blew up on 9/11. And I'm the real truth of that. And then they went on using my money. They murdered 2 million Muslim people who were guilty of absolutely nothing.
Right.
And all media pretends I don't exist. And you know, I've got all the documents to prove I exist, don't you, Greg?
Yeah.
And even the 9/11 truthers were supposed to interview me. I stayed at their home for 7 months, and they were afraid to interview me. Can you imagine this, Greg? The person that runs the 9/11 truther site was afraid to interview me because they're afraid of the government killing them. So all the 9/11
And then she
truthers,
she took money from made a fundraiser, and then said that she didn't raise any money, and then like next year she buys a big house. It's unreal.
now, well, I don't know if that's related, but yeah, she told me that nobody helped me. And I was on my way to talk to the police about Jimmy Hoffa's, where he was really buried, and to talk to L. Brooks Patterson before he died about the real Oakland County child killers and their role in John F. Kennedy's murder 7 years later. 5 families of 5 governors kidnapped me at 4 and raped and tortured me and murdered my twin. L. Brooks Patterson gave the world Dr. Nasser, and now they're giving the world Dr. Anderson. And it's just one great big government cover-up of my life, because you know, Greg, Anderson and Andrews and Osborne and Wallace and Long, all of these governor families, they kidnapped me.
Right. So right now, out of the University of Michigan, there's a $490 million payout from the university to the victims.
Thousands of people to a Dr. Anderson at my Michigan State University. And while I was sitting in L. Brooks Patterson's office in Oakland County, Michigan, in a police station, they tried to put me in jail, gave the world Dr. Nasser. And as they tried to put me in jail, 2 more kids in my family were murdered.
Yeah.
Right there in Michigan. Tony Jr. was murdered, and Kiki's daughter, Serena, was murdered.
Daughter, yeah.
And I haven't looked into that because I don't have the funds to hang out in Michigan and look into those murders. But I know it'll say on Tony Jr., it'll say something like suicide or natural causes. And on Serena, it'll say suicide or natural causes. And it was murders, because it coincided with my trip to L. Brooks Patterson's office to report the real Oakland County child killers.
Yeah.
So instead of doing that, I get to Michigan, sit in L. Brooks Patterson's office while they try to put me in jail. And I had driven 6,000 miles to tell them where Jimmy Hoffa's really buried and who the Oakland County child killers really were, because my twin was the first kid murdered in Oakland County in 1957, not 1970 or 67 or whatever they want to say.
Right.
They've murdered kids in my life. The Duncan kids were murdered on the day they murdered the Kennedys. 5 kids. LBJ called my home. All of this is interrelated with my life, and Eastman taking my photographs that show the Twin Towers on September 11th, 1953, before the Twin Towers were built.
All the way back to there.
And then I'm related to the presidents on US money.
And not only that, but every one of these governors that were rapists, we've got the histories of these people all the way back to, over 100 years in some cases.
You can't believe what you're finding.
Hundreds of years.
You can't believe what you find every time you research one of my names, can you?
Right, and how the history, how they've interwoven your life into history is just unbelievable.
So that's why you have so many chapters in your book now, because it just keeps getting bigger.
Yeah. And their networks are rather extensive. My car was in a fender bender, had some body damage, and was towed up to
I forgot about that.
Towing.
Yeah, Jeff Westfall he stole my band and my publishing trademark as I became a publisher, Jeff Westfall. That's correct.
So the police sent it without my knowing at the time. sent it to Westfall, where they sat on my car for 2 months and didn't fix the thing,
Yeah,
and said
that's
they couldn't order
because
the parts. And then I go and I order the part, and it comes in just fine. You
they know
know,
you're writing my truth, researching my federal documents, and the Westfall family stole my publishing license all the way back in the
yeah,
60s
right.
with
And
all
I
my
have no
relatives.
doubt, because Westfall Towing was not near where I am, so the police had to have sent it there, on purpose.
Yeah, well, that's when I had just gotten my trademark and applied to be a publisher. And gee, everybody attacked me and stole a business I created 12 years earlier. I
Right.
created Bottom Line Publishing on Broadway in New York, and everybody stole it from me.
Yeah. Why would they take my car 20 miles away? It's not even close to the closest tow truck. There's all kinds of tow trucks within a mile or two of there.
Yeah, no, they did
And
that
they
on
called one
purpose.
from 20 miles away, and then
They
they
did that
didn't
on
repair my
purpose.
car. Yeah.
The Jeff Westfall, I put up my father took a picture of my little brother in his hat and his outfit playing in my band that they stole from me as I became Bottom Line Publishing in New York.
Mhm.
And it wasn't one or two people, it was 100 of my friends and relatives. They did this behind my back. They stole my business.
Mhm.
And it was a trademark. I got the trademark on Telegraph Road through Weiner and Associates in front of Dire Straits' house. I hired Weiner and Associates to get the trademark and protect it, and they took the money and they didn't protect the trademark. They stole it all over the globe. 2,500 corporations started using it by the end of that year. And then they
Yeah.
put it in Webster's dictionary after I applied for it and got it. It
Yeah.
just disappeared right out of the Library of Congress with my federal income tax licenses and with my publishing company.
Right.
Jeff Westfall, where they took your car, Westfall died in a plane crash about 2 months after he and my own relatives stole my business, Bottom Line Publishing, New York.
Right. Wow.
That's why the police in Ohio took it there, because you got my neighbors, Neil Young, Crosby, Stills, and Nash. They wrote 4 Dead in Ohio. I was kidnapped at 4. They owned Lionel Trains next to the farm where I purchased from Donald Trump's tax attorney. And I went to school with the Crosby family.
It's unbelievable how connected all these people are from coast to
And
coast all over the
they
country.
came from Ohio. That was Kent State, where they sang 4 Dead in Ohio. They were actually
Right.
singing right to me because one of my kidnappers was Daryl Hall.
Hmm.
And Daryl Hall is that by where he started Daryl's TV and gave the world Joe Walsh and the Eagles off of 4th Street in Royal Oak. All these people knew me, and they raped me at 4.
Right. So Bob Dylan
And they've
staying
been
positively
marking me
for
and
you.
hiding me in all media for 69 years now.
Mhm.
And Senator Graham helps them do it with the media he owns in Detroit.
And looking back at Graham's, man, Graham's goes
Eastman
back
helps.
awfully far.
Eastman and Graham. I bought my land where the CIA gun and drug trade from Trump's tax attorney, Mazar.
Mhm.
And all of this is interrelated in my life. Going
Yeah,
all the way back.
and Poe worked. Edgar Allan Poe worked for Graham's magazine.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Edgar Allan Poe worked for Graham's magazine.
Yeah. And
Back in
then my grandmother's family was Edgar Allan Poe's literary critic in a London newspaper.
Right.
And then Linda Moulton Howe, she married Mr. Howe, who left a statue to my family on the East Coast when she came back, and her and her kids died on a shipwreck outside the port of New York.
Yeah. And now Hal is covering you with UFOs.
UFOs, that's right.
It's unbelievable how this all goes together.
Nick Pope, you got Nick Pope when the Pope was shot leaving my college.
Right.
Reagan was shot. by,
Yeah, right. Like a day or so after he left
he talked to
Macomb
me
Community
and
College,
left my college and he was shot. The Pope was
right?
shot. My family put him on their magazines. I was Harris
Mhm.
Publishing, my family. I'm the Harris family. And we
What
got
all
out
were
of
you writing to
magazines.
Kennedy about when he was shot? You were
When
10
my
years old at the time.
father-in-law gave Bill Gates the software to make his first computer, my family, Harris Publishing, got them out of magazines. They sold all the magazines because they knew that they couldn't sell ads in magazines once the computer and the internet got out. So they sold off their magazines and got out of it. And they had 260 worldwide magazines. They put the Pope on the front cover of Life or Look, and they put Reagan on it. They put all the presidents on the covers of their magazines all over the globe.
Mhm.
That's my family, Harris.
Mhm.
And now Obama and Clinton, they murdered Terry Heath on the Manning farm. They murdered Victoria Milan, the state police from Graham State, turned a blind eye to the murders. They wrote natural causes and suicides on the murders, no news coverage.
Not
And
even an
now
obituary.
the Vice President Biden gave you Kamala Harris, my name.
Right. And
And
Jackson,
my family was with Lincoln
Condi
and
Jackson.
Ford Theater.
Yeah.
Clara Harris was in Ford Theater with Lincoln. That's my family member.
Right. And you even resemble President Jackson quite a bit. I
That's
compared your
my
face
direct
in a picture.
descendant. So is Albert Pike.
Yeah.
My family was against slavery and the slave trade. Kamala Harris, her family, and her name is not Harris, it's Emhoff.
Right.
Her family were slave traders, just the opposite of who the real Harris family that founded America were.
Yeah.
And Joe Biden is doing this with his 1.5 billion in payola from China. And you know, there's no lie in this, Greg. You already know this.
Mhm.
The people that watch this video don't know it.
Right. Right. So
And
go back to Kennedy.
and
What
then
were
you
you
said
writing to Kennedy
I
about?
look like Jackson. Well, I
Yeah, you
am
did.
the Jackson family, and I live with Michael Jackson's family. I met Michael Jackson when I was 3 years old. Or I'm sorry, when I was 9 years old and Michael Jackson was 3 years old,
Yeah,
I
right,
met
yeah.
him at the state fair. He was dancing and playing a little trumpet and a kazoo.
Mhm.
I stood right there on the stage, shook his hand and said, "Hi, that's really cool." I was a drummer.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
right in the neighborhood in Oakland County where I was kidnapped and raped.
Right. So they put all that together and they gave you a Supreme Court justice by the name of Jackson.
No, the Supreme Court justice in my family was Mr. Fuller, and Mrs. Fuller was my grandmother.
No, I'm talking about the one Biden's appointing now.
Oh yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, he's appointing my family after him and Obama and Clinton murdered my wives and my grandmother and three of her daughters and her son, her only son. So I know
Yeah.
Kamala Harris isn't my family. And my family's in the Smithsonian with Jack Ruby's shoes and Judy Garland's shoes. We have the Massey Ferguson tractors and the Harris steam thrashers in the Smithsonian. My Aunt Gardner left the only known photos of Amelia Earhart's last flight in the Smithsonian. And Kamala Harris is pretending to be my family. Now he's appointing a Black Supreme Court justice using my name, Jackson. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
After
he appointed Garland as
4 of my wives.
Yeah. And appointed Garland as Attorney General.
Yeah. Garland, and that's the Wizard of Oz, and that's Osborne, Governor Osborne's family.
Right.
And Trump before him gave the world a bar. Yeah. And because they screamed the Tennessee Attorney General's name over my phone into my ears, and it had to be metal voices, as they dismembered my wife Victoria, cut her ears off and slit her throat, they screamed Slater over the phone, and that's the Supreme Court, the Attorney General in Tennessee. So he wouldn't help me, and they covered up that murder of Victoria. And then Trump appoints Barr, and Barr was my neighbor in Oakland County who pretended she was me as she ran Senator Graham's TV and radio stations. She said Hollywood was using her. No, they weren't. Hollywood was using me.
Yeah, the evidence, Mrs. Fuller's friend was Slater.
Yeah, right. Explain that.
I'll have to go back and read it, but see, I had it. I don't know if I can find it through the whole story here, but yeah, let's see. I took the, let's see. I still have the picture of it here. Nope.
Back in Michigan, a politician and a judge by the name of Slater let a criminal out of jail to come murder my wife, and he organized 9 bikers to murder my wife in Johnson City, Tennessee. And I told the state police this was happening. They gave me 2 retired state policemen as security over my wife, and they watched them murder my wife and then tried to blame me for it.
Pretty full article, so I may not find it in a reasonable amount of time.
That has to do with Edgar Allan Poe and Fuller, right?
Yeah, Mrs. Margaret, Sarah Margaret Fuller
and Margaret Fuller, and that was my aunt, Marguerite Fuller.
Yes.
Only her last name was Gardner, and
Right.
She was Ava Gardner's family. And Ava Gardner, my family, married Frank Sinatra and Mickey Rooney. And I'm related to people like this throughout history of this country. And because Admiral Byrd is my relative, I'm related to all the kings in Europe, not just all the presidents on US money.
Yeah.
They've attacked.
They say she, Margaret Fuller, they say she flirted with Osgood.
Yeah. And that'll be a CIA bullshit story.
Yeah, I can tell.
They cover up my family and everything. And you've watched them do this in real time.
Yeah.
They'll change the Baker name to 2 Ks instead of 1. And you've watched them do it. They go back in old news stories and rewrite them and change names and dates and times.
Yeah, after he marries.
As soon as I point it out and say it in the video, they go back and change it. So this whole country has a fake history, all the way back to the President Lincoln's murder. And I'm the guy in common with all of it. Lincoln's murder, Kennedy's murder, them shooting at President Kennedy, shooting at Reagan, shooting at my family member, Gerald Ford, whose real name is Gardner and King, and I'm the Gardner and King families. When Kennedy was killed, he had just given my Uncle Tony, who ran Ford Motor Company, the owner, Henry Ford's house, his mansion. He gave my Uncle Tony and his wife, Susan, the first Susan B. Anthony coin he minted in Washington, as he told the Federal Reserve to go screw themselves. And then Kennedy was dead a week after my Uncle Tony and his wife, Susan King, got that gold Kennedy dollar, or $50. He sent them to them as a wedding present. And that was in 1960 when he was still alive.
There's a whole history of the Wizard of Oz and how that associates with the silver and the silver certificates that Kennedy was producing, and all that's going to be in the book too.
Yeah, put it all in there because it's all related to my life, and they're hiding all of this from the general public, and they're hiding the murders of 4 wives, the Oakland County child killings that went from 1950. Kiki's kid and Tony, my brother-in-law Tony's kid, they were murdered in 2015. So the Oakland County child killings are still going on all the way up into 2015. And they're hiding all of this, Greg. And I'm the guy who was originally kidnapped by the people who are the Oakland County child killers. And if I go and try to make a murder report out, they try to call around and tell me I'm a criminal. And they murdered their own kids. Theodore Oglesby, when I told him I was kidnapped and his uncle was outside the house I was kidnapped and raped in, he was murdered that night. And he was my friend. He was a nice kid. That was when I was 15, Greg. L. Brooks Patterson murdered his own nephew in his jail cell. And I don't think it, I know it. And then if I try to tell them the truth nowadays, the people that took over that office after L. Brooks Patterson died, they try to put me in jail to hide the murders they've committed.
Yeah, at least L. Brooks Patterson got a little bit of what was coming to him. He didn't die a very nice death, that's for sure.
Who's that?
L. Brooks Patterson. He had colon cancer.
Yeah.
I hear he died a pretty miserable death.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear that. He was a terrible
Yeah.
person. He
Exactly.
watched me get tortured and raped, my twin beat to death, and he laughed about it. When I ran out, I escaped through a basement window when somebody knocked on a back door, and he was sitting between that house and where my parents lived, and he laughed at me running across the street all beat up and raped. He laughed about it.
And he was replaced by
terrible person. And they said he was a hero when he died. What kind of a hero never solves the murder of a child?
He wasn't liked at all in Detroit either.
He shouldn't have been. He was terrible.
Yeah.
That whole county's terrible.
Right.
And that's where the politician Slater let a guy out of jail to murder Victoria Milan in Tennessee. Slater, the politician, where I built my first house on Isabella Street, and that's Isabella Gardner Museum, where Kennedy was born. That's my family, the Gardner family. So they make me out to be the criminal as they murder little kids and cover it up so they can get 20 million a year in taxpayer money. And that's what they've been doing all my life, Greg.
Yeah. Well, I can't find that part where it mentions Slater.
And then the federal government's just as corrupt. The federal government hired the people that murdered my wives. CBS murdered my attorney and destroyed my income after they murdered my attorney. So I can't tell the world the truth about who really killed the Kennedy family. And you know, I was working with all the Kennedy family members in sessions of Congress as they were murdered.
Right.
Because I was a federal license. I had a federal license to collect royalties. I was helping rewrite the Berne Convention with the Kennedy family.
Yeah. Yeah,
with
there you
Senator
go.
Graham, with every senator in the country, Arlene Specter, 11.
At 10 years old, and the president of the United States was writing you back, which is pretty fascinating.
Right. And then the families that kidnapped me at 4 broke into my home and stole all my letters from Kennedy to hide history. The police tried to tell me they wanted to sell them. No, they didn't. They wanted to destroy them so I can't tell the world truth.
Right.
Osborne did that. Osborne is a terrible curse on this nation. They're killing little kids, and they run the FBI sex crime division.
Still, Mike Osborne running the sex crimes division.
And they're the ones killing the kids in Oakland County. Evil people. And this whole nation's been taken over by criminals. All 3 parties are criminals. So the independents, the Democrats, and the Republicans. All of them know my truth, and all of them hide my truth. And they run the media, and they hire people to murder my family members.
Here it is. I'll read this. Shortly after Fuller's death, this is the critic of Edgar Allan Poe, the one that died in the shipwreck.
In London. She was in charge of all those Harris magazines and the London press. Mm-hmm. She was his real critic in Europe.
Right. And now they kind of buried her under a big old list.
They're burying her under 100 other critics who weren't critics and didn't own a newspaper. Go ahead.
Shortly after Fuller's death, her importance faded. Her obituary in the newspaper she had once edited, the Daily Tribune, said that her works have few great sentiments, but as a whole, they command themselves mainly by the vigor of thought, habitual fearlessness rather than freedom of utterance. As her biographer, Abby Slater, wrote.
Right, and
So she
Slater
a-
was screamed over the phone in my ear Halloween Eve as my wife's throat was slit in a
right,
hospital in Johnson City, Tennessee, over the Walters family phone. And
right.
Walters is not my relative. Walters tried to hire me to burn down their properties. And I told them no. Then they murdered my wives right inside of hospitals, and state policemen helped them do it. And this is truth,
Unbelievable.
Greg, and all of that needs to be a chapter in your book.
Right. And then the ship that she sunk on, that was Elizabeth.
That's my
It's
little
called the
sister,
Elizabeth.
Patty Elizabeth.
Right.
All these names they're in my family. That's my family.
Right.
And Joe Biden's taken payola from China, and after helping Obama and Clinton murder my family for over 100 years. Lincoln is my family.
Mm-hmm.
Kennedy,
Went to
my
school with
family.
you.
Kennedy, my family. Jackie Bouvier, my family. They're my cousins.
How was Kennedy related? Explain that one.
I don't remember anymore. I was related to Thomas Jefferson through the Harris and Fuller families, and all the way back to the original colonies through the Portwood family.
Yeah. Okay.
Portwood family out of London. I'm a cousin to the Queen right now. Anybody can walk into any library and see that the Byrd family is related to all the kings in Europe. I'm part of the Byrd family. They kidnapped me, stole my business, stole $2 trillion in entertainment contracts from me in 1960, blew up the Twin Towers, blew up my civil rights case. After the theft, 20 years after the theft, they had to hide the theft because I was still alive after they tried to murder me all my life.
Right.
Remember the shot of radiation? Pastor Nick tried to murder me with 3 pills, and he wasn't my doctor. And then the New York singer singing right out of my stolen trademark, the Bottomline Club in New York, Bruce Springsteen, he sang about Pastor Nick as Pastor Nick tried to murder me. He sang to me about the doctor who tried to murder me from my stolen trademark in New York, where I was a publisher in Foley Federal Court. And then the police will tell me things like this are coincidence.
No way.
And they'll tell me my wives killed themselves when they were dismembered.
Yeah.
This country,
even have the hospital
this country has
reports.
become so corrupt over greed. It's pathetic, Greg. And all of this is greed.
Yeah, it is.
Joe Biden's selling the whole country out, and they pretend like they're pretending like he's telling China what to do. Well, China bought him $1.5 billion. You think he's really telling China what to do?
Right, and for
All
a
of your
bribe, he may
media,
get millions of people killed.
everything in the media is a lie, and it's all geared at hiding my truth of Kennedy's murder, Oakland County, Jimmy Hoffa's real killers, 9/11. Tim McVeigh was my next door neighbor selling the drugs being flown into my farm. I bought the farm from Trump's tax attorney. None of this is a lie. I couldn't, I couldn't possibly make a story up like this.
No, and then everything you look into, it's all
And
there.
I always tell you the same thing every time you talk to me. Do you see any notes here?
Right.
Am I reading
No.
anything?
No.
And all
You
the
say the
names
story
line
perfectly.
up, don't they?
Mm-hmm. All the way back to the 1800s and further on some. Yeah.
It's unbelievable. This country is so criminal, and it's not one party, it's not 2 parties, it's all 3 parties. They're all criminals, and they've all murdered my wives and kids, every party, independent, Democrats, and Republicans. They've all tried to tell me I'm a bank robber. I killed Jimmy Hoffa. And the truth of my life, I adopted 7 kids and paid for them, and none of their real parents gave me any child support. I paid for them out of my own earnings from my own business my entire life.
Yeah.
I gave
and
my
took care of a girl in a wheelchair.
I gave my first wife, when I divorced her, she stabbed me in the back with a butcher knife. I divorced her that year, and I gave her the house and a brand new car and walked away in tennis shoes without even a vehicle of my own. Left my 2 kids with her after she stabbed me in the back. And I walked in on her 2 years prior to that with a Warren detective having sex with him in front of my newborn daughter.
Right.
In my house. I gave her the house. My second wife, she was a drug dealer. I gave her a house for $1 and I walked away, got a new farm.
And a
I never
relative of
divorced.
that.
I never divorced a wife after those first 2.
Right.
Because my next wives treated me with love, care, didn't lie to me. They weren't witches and drug dealers, and they didn't stab me in the back. The government murdered them.
Right.
To hide my truth of who killed Hoffa, who killed Kennedy, the truth of the Oklahoma bombing. A federal building got blown up as my trademark was stolen, and I had to file taxes every year there. I mean, really think about this, Greg.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable what this government has done. And it's not one party, it's all 3 parties, and they all work together to hide my truth of who really killed your president, who was smarter than all of them. I really knew the Kennedy family. I would correspond with them, talk to them, help create laws with them. And they were the most intelligent people I ever met in my life. The people who took their place, all of them, Bush, Ford, Reagan, they're like retarded people compared to the Kennedy family.
Yeah, what'd you say about him? It was something like something to the effect like he could talk to you and say something completely different than what he was saying because he could put a whole other message in what he was saying as he said it, kind of something of that.
That was the biggest loss this country's ever had when they murdered the Kennedy family. Those 3 brothers were so educated, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
I've never had a college professor, and I taught science and electronics at 14 in Warren, Michigan, to tank arsenal employees at 14. So, gee, I must be a genius, right, Greg? The Kennedys,
I would think
the
so.
Kennedys made me look like a retard. They were the most educated people I ever knew in my entire life.
Yeah.
And I'm a federal publisher in every country on earth. The smartest people, I'm going to say this again, the Kennedy family were the smartest, most intelligent men I ever talked to in my entire life. I'm 70 years old. The people who took their place after murdering them were like having retarded people in the White House. You
And
understand?
you know people like Nassim Harameini and all them
Joe
too.
Biden. I mean, look at Joe Biden. He can't even remember what he's going to say.
Yeah. And George Bush couldn't put a sentence together either.
Neither one of them. And George Bush and his son, they and their military friends instigated 9/11 and blamed it on Muslims who had nothing to do with it. And I'm living proof of this.
Mhm.
You need to keep writing my book, get it done, and get it out there before the next election.
And now they're trying to tell you that George Bush, not the one we know, but George Bush from the 1800s was one of Poe's literary critics. It's unbelievable what they're doing.
Yeah, they'll do anything to make me look like I'm nothing.
Right.
And I owned Baker College at birth, didn't I, Greg?
Yeah.
I'm gonna let this go now. It's always good talking to you. What I've read in the book you've already written is very good. Just keep doing what you're doing. Carry your gun, stay alive, and get it published.
Ohio has a concealed carry and with no permit now, so you can
Good. Carry a gun.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And use it. Put one in both pockets.
And it's rhetorical. It or not rhetorical, but it's what's the word? Where you can take it from one state, transferable from one state to another too. So you can to West Virginia anyway, reciprocal. So you can go from West Virginia into Ohio and vice versa with concealed carry and no permit now.
Good. I'm glad to hear it.
Yep. All right.
I have 5 with me every day of my life. You take care.
See you later.